Hi, Donley Dolphins and everybody else. I'm so glad you're here with me today. We are going to restart again at chapter 4 of the Dark Hills Divide. Now, remember yesterday we talked about, we learned about the lodge that Alexa was staying at and how the men all meet together and talk about the politics of the town. And we figured out what Alexa's plan is, what she's going to try and do while she's at this lodge. She's going to try and find a way outside of those walls that surround the city. So that's her plan. I'm pretty sure she might get into a little bit of mischief here in chapter 4. Let's see. Chapter 4, Purvis Kotcher. From my room, and as far as I knew, my room only, a person could catch a glimpse of the world outside of Bridewell. If I stood on the sill of my window, which was about 3 feet off the floor, I could look out from the top edge of the opening. From this vantage point, I could almost see over the wall and into the distance. As soon as I arrived in my room, I perched myself on the sill and looked out as far as I could in every direction. I hopped down and went to my bag, unfastened the strap, and flipped open the leather cover. My father had scolded me for not packing more warm clothes, but the truth was, I needed the extra room in my bag for other things. Once all my clothing was put away, I went to work untying the lace in the center of what appeared to be the bottom of the bag. I had sewn in 2 extra leather flaps, which met in the middle and were tied tightly together. This created the illusion of a bottom and covered the lower third of the space in my bag. Now I flapped the covers back, uncovering the curious collection of objects I had brought. Hard candy from home, a pouch of coins, and a book, a wallet with small metal tools purchased from a traveling merchant in Lathbury, a compass, stationery with pen and ink, my letter seal, candles and wood matches, an old watch. I rifled through my collection and found the item I was looking for, a small ornate spyglass, an item that I had borrowed, without asking, from one of the drawers in my mother's bedroom. I slid the cylindrical overlapping sections open and ran my hand over the smooth decorated surface. Paisley patterns of orange and purple flowed watery along its face, with smart brass rings at the end of each section. I clawed my way back onto the sill and peered through the spyglass. I could see rolling hills in the distance, most treeless and covered with thick brush in different shades of green. To the right, just in view, was the Turlock Gate and its twin guard towers. This was where one person in Bridewell who despised me spent a good deal of his time. The wretched little man who was convinced that everything outside the wall was evil and dangerous. For reasons I had never understood, Warvold loved him and had even made him captain of the guards. I had to concede that his tenacity for patrolling the streets and walls of Bridewell was legendary, but his suspicious demeanor weighed heavily against him. He seemed to naturally sense my interest in the world outside, and on every visit I had made in the past, he had shadowed me relentlessly, mean, nasty, and always watching me. To my thinking, that summed up Purvis Kotcher. My eye caught a tick of movement, and I was distracted from my thoughts of Purvis. Outside the northeast wall, the valley floor quickly turned into rolling hills, each one growing steadily higher and higher until it disappeared into the mist. The brush was thick and gnarly, covered in greens and browns and reds. The farther of the hills, the more the brush created a tapestry of color, ever darker. In the distance, they took on a somber, uninviting appearance. I saw the movement again, about 100 yards from the edge of the wall in a patch of red. Could it be a large animal roaming the dark hills or an evil beast stirring in the dense thicket? I drew the spyglass to my eye, squinting into the lens as I panned back and forth. Except for a rustle from the prevailing wind, the brush was still. Maybe all I had seen was the brush shaken by a breeze. I continued inspecting the area, but eventually my neck burned and my back grew sore enough that I took a break. I collapsed my spyglass and turned to jump down off the sill, and there he was, standing in front of me. "Well, well, well, Alexa Daly," I yelped, lost my balance, and came tumbling out of the sill. It was Purvis Kotcher. "What am I to do with you, Alexa?" he said, a condescending grin smeared across his thin lips. I rubbed my knee with one hand and placed the spyglass in my pocket with the other. I hoped he hadn't seen me using it. I rose and looked at him, feeling even smaller than my 4.5-foot frame. Purvis was barely a foot taller than I was. He wore his black hair at shoulder length, and he had deep-set, dark eyes. One can become lost in the depth of certain eyes, especially those of handsome or pretty. But Purvis had eyes that reminded me more of rats and other creatures of the night, and I was forever turning away when I encountered them staring back at me. He held his finger to his mouth, tapping his thin lips as he stared at me. He added a wimpy mustache during my absence. "I see you're back and careless as ever." He paced around my room until he neared my open bag. "It's been a nice summer so far in Bridewell. Hardly a reason to work if you're a man in uniform these days. Just one lazy day after another. But of course, now that you're back, I'll have plenty to keep me busy, won't I?" He hovered over my bag, ready to reach inside and dig through its contents. "I think the mustache makes you look shorter," I said, knowing I was taking a risk in a room alone with him. He jerked his hand back from my bag and pointed at me. "Let's get one thing clear right now," he said. "If I see you on that sill again, I'll have a chat with your father." He paused, glared at me, and placed his hand upon the black stick hanging at his side. "I'm watching you, Alexa Daly. So much as go near that wall and you'll find my club against your knees. Do we understand each other?" I nodded. "And one more thing. I'll take that spyglass in your pocket," said Purvis. "I wouldn't want any crazy ideas getting into your head." "I don't know what you're talking about." Purvis raised his voice. "Give me the spyglass now, or I'll march you downstairs and give it to me in front of your father, Ganesh, and Warvold." If my father found out I'd been spying outside the wall, let alone with a telescope I'd stolen from my mother, he would seriously restrict the freedom for the duration of the trip. I pulled it out of my pocket, had a last good look at it, and tossed it to Purvis. "You're a nobody, Alexa, a worm, and just between you and me, so is your father." He started back from my bag with a surly grin on his face. He was about to put his hand in when footsteps approached my room. Purvis quickly concealed my spyglass in his jacket and ran his hands through his stringy hair. Into the doorway strode Warvold, looking curiously at Purvis. "Culture, what are you doing here?" he asked, standing his ground just between my room and the hallway. "Just catching up on old times with Alexa. We haven't seen each other for some time, you know," replied Purvis. Warvold stared at him accusingly, then moved out of the doorway. "Back to work with you, protecting the city from evil hordes and all that. Alexa and I have a date for which you have already made us late." Purvis glanced my way. I could tell he was thinking about revealing the spyglass, but he didn't. "Very well, sir, as you wish," he said. Then he bowed and slithered out of the room. Warvold escorted me out of my room, down the stairs, and into the night. The walk ended in his death, as I've explained, and it left me all alone, far away from the lodge, too scared to move. Okay, so now our timelines are beginning to come together. So this walk that they're on right now is going to take us to where our story started. After he died, I huddled up against the wall, searching for what little warmth remained, locked away in the giant stones. My eyes fell upon the locket around Warvold's lifeless neck, and then to his closed fist clutching the locket key, which got me to thinking about things one should really not be thinking about at such a time. If ever there was a person who knew how to get outside of the wall, it would have been Warvold. I didn't know what other things that key might unlock, but I had a suspicion that possessing the key might get me one step closer to sitting with my back against the other side of the wall. My desire for the gate key gave me an ounce of courage, just enough to touch the cold, bony wrist of a dead man in the dark. Without his coat on, old Warvold's wrist was thin and bare, cold and clammy, covered with a dry dust of desert skin. Wrapping my hand around the wrist, I lifted his lifeless arm. At the moment, all the shock that I had been feeling left me, and I realized for the first time that my old friend Warvold was really gone. I'd never talk to him again, or hold his hand in mine, or listen to one of his frightening stories. I'd expected to feel dread when I touched his spiritless skin. Instead, I was sad and lonely. I sat in the dark, held Warvold's comforting hand, and cried bitterly. It took me a long time to gain my composure, but finally I began to lift Warvold's hand up so I could pry the key out of his clenched fist. About halfway up, I lost my grip and dropped his arm into the dirt with a thud. I carefully turned his arm over, set it in his lap, then peeled his fingers open, revealing the golden key. I drew the key up, unlatched the lock, then put the key back in Warvold's hand and closed his dead fingers around it. Inside the locket, I found 2 more keys. I held the locket with one hand and removed the keys. One was large and gold, the other small and silver. After thinking it over, I returned the large one, the one that had opened the gate, thinking it best that something reside inside the locket to avoid suspicion when my father or Ganesh eventually checked it. I rose to my feet, surprisingly sore from sitting in the cold for so long. After a final glance back at Warvold, I began walking in the direction of Rennie Lodge. In a single walk, I had lost so much. But I had found something as well. So in this chapter, we met Purvis Kotcher, and already I have a feeling about him, which is why I changed my voice to sound a little bit yucky. So Alexa, now our timelines have met, so we know now what Alexa found in that locket was a key, and she took that, hoping that it would help her get outside the wall. And you'll notice on the front cover, you can see that she has that locket around her neck, and there's something in her hand, so I'm wondering if that key that she took from the locket is going to help her get to the picture that we see on the front cover. All right, tomorrow is chapter 5 called The Library, Alexa's favorite place in Bridewell. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.